Cowboys on a long cattle drive faced a landscape that could kill the unprepared in a single day. The desert was an immense, silent killer, and its most effective weapon was dehydration. Water was a constant enemy and an elusive friend. A single day without it could spell the end for a man and his herd. It was the difference between a successful drive and a deadly disaster. The cowboy survival came down to a deep, almost instinctual knowledge of the land, an understanding of the environment that most people today couldn't even begin to grasp. It started with where they searched for water and how they conserved every precious drop. They weren't just looking for streams or rivers. They were looking for signs. To the untrained eye, the ground was a monotonous expanse of brown and gray. But to a cowboy, it was a living map. Green patches of vegetation in a sea of brown, the flight patterns of birds at dawn and dusk, and the subtle change in the air's humidity all pointed to a nearby source. A cowboy's knowledge of the terrain was like a human GPS, where a wrong turn didn't mean a minor detour. It meant your herd and your crew could die of thirst. They had to be human dowsers, capable of finding life-giving water where others saw only dust. They could read the language of the land, understanding that a dry creek bed could hide a shallow well just a few feet below the surface, its presence betrayed only by a slightly darker soil or a patch of hardy grass. They were masters of a science that had no name, a blend of observation, instinct, and a lifetime of harsh experience. Finding water was only the beginning. The water they found was a carefully managed resource, more valuable than gold. Canteens were used for personal hydration, but the real work was getting enough for the herd. 100 head of cattle could drink a small lake dry in a single stop. The cowboys understood that a dehydrated cow was a dead cow, and dead cows meant a failed drive. They watered the herd strategically, often at dusk and dawn to avoid the midday sun, which caused animals to drink more and lose it faster through panting. They knew to use salt to encourage drinking without oversaturating the animals, a simple but effective trick that kept the herd healthy and moving. Conservation on the trail was a game of inches, where every cup saved was another mile gained. A smart cowboy never drank too much at once, but instead took small sips, moistening his mouth and throat to trick his body into feeling less thirsty. They learned to chew on small pebbles or a piece of leather to stimulate saliva production, another ingenious way to conserve their limited water supply. They also used the landscape to their advantage, traveling along valley floors or in the shade of mesas and cliffs whenever possible, not just for personal comfort, but to reduce the water consumption of the herd. The cattle would move more efficiently in the cooler air, requiring less frequent stops and conserving their energy and water reserves. This wasn't just about a man's survival. It was about the survival of the entire enterprise, a delicate balance of human ingenuity and animal husbandry. But the biggest challenge was not just finding water, it was finding clean water. A stagnant pond could sicken a whole herd, leading to a loss of thousands of dollars and weeks of wasted time. Cowboys learned to purify water using basic methods, like boiling it over a fire when they had the time and fuel, or using natural filters. They knew which types of rock and sand created the best filtration systems, a skill that could mean the difference between life and death. They were part chemist, part geologist, and part hydrologist, all wrapped up in a dusty, sun-beaten body. Their knowledge of water was so profound that they could almost taste the difference between a healthy spring and a stagnant pool, just by looking at the surrounding vegetation. It was an inherited wisdom, passed down from one generation of cattlemen to the next, a crucial part of the living history of the American West. A cowboy's clothing was more than just a uniform. It was a complex system of personal climate control, a perfectly engineered suit for surviving the most brutal weather conditions. Every item, from the tip of his hat to the soles of his boots, served a specific, life-saving purpose. This was not about fashion or looking tough. It was about practicality and survival. The most iconic piece of their attire, the wide-brimmed hat, often a Stetson, was their first and most important line of defense against the sun. This wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a mobile shade tree. It blocked the relentless sun from their face, neck, and shoulders, preventing sunburn and heat stroke, two of the greatest dangers in the desert. The brim also served to deflect rain and snow from their eyes, and it could be used to fan a fire or scoop water from shallow stream. It was like having your own personal cloud, a patch of shade that moved with you, providing vital protection against the desert's scorching rays. The hat's high crown was not just for style, either. It was designed to allow hot air to rise away from the head, creating a natural ventilation system. A well-worn hat was a part of a cowboy's body, a constant companion that protected him from the elements. The bandana, a seemingly simple piece of colored cloth, was a multi-purpose tool that was arguably the most versatile item a cowboy owned. It was soaked in water and worn around the neck to cool the carotid arteries and reduce core body temperature through evaporative cooling. When the wind kicked up a dust storm, it was pulled over the face to filter out the choking grit, protecting their lungs and eyes. The bandana was a personal air conditioner, a dust mask, and a sweat rag all rolled into one. It could be used as a tourniquet, a sling for an injured arm, a bandage, a pot holder for a hot coffee pot, or even a rope extension in a pinch. It was the original Swiss Army knife of the cowboy world, a small piece of fabric that could solve a dozen different problems. The simple act of wetting and tying it around the neck was a scientifically sound method of cooling the body, a primitive form of technology that was born of necessity and proved its worth day after day. Their clothing, often made of denim or thick cotton, also served a dual purpose. It might seem counterintuitive to wear heavy clothes in the blistering heat, but the thick fabric provided insulation. It trapped a layer of air between the skin and the cloth, which acted as a buffer against the sun's direct heat, much like a thermos keeps liquid both hot and cold. The long sleeves and pants protected them from the sun's harsh UV rays, which could cause severe sunburn and long-term skin damage, as well as from thorns, brush, and insect bites. They understood that the sun was a greater threat than a little extra weight in their clothes. They valued thick, durable fabrics that could withstand the rigors of the trail and the constant friction of riding a horse for 12 hours a day. The denim, in particular, was a marvel of its time, a fabric so strong it could resist tears and punctures, yet porous enough to allow air to circulate and sweat to evaporate. And let's not forget the chaps. These heavy leather coverings were worn over their pants and were not just for show. Their primary purpose was to protect the cowboy's leg from the thorns and brush of the trail, as well as from the constant rubbing against the saddle. But in the blistering heat, they also provided an extra layer of insulation, preventing the sun from baking the cowboy's legs and the metal of the saddle from burning his skin. They were a form of armor, a shield against the endless assaults of the desert. Every stitch, every fold, every choice of material was a testament to the fact that on the frontier, every item had to earn its place. The cowboy's wardrobe was a carefully considered system of survival, a brilliant example of how necessity births innovation and how understanding your environment is the first step to conquering it. They were not just dressing for a job, they were dressing for life. Cowboys learned to live and work by the sun, but not in the way you might think. Their daily schedule was a tactical masterpiece designed to avoid the desert's most brutal hours. A typical day began long before dawn, a time when the world was silent and the air was still cool. While the stars were bright and the land was just a whisper of shadow, they would start the day's movement, pushing the cattle on the trail. This early start was not for romance, or because they were early risers by nature. It was a calculated move to cover a significant distance before the sun climbed high enough to bake the earth and drain the life from man and beast. The cattle moved more willingly in the pre-dawn cool, their hooves stirring up less dust, their bodies expending less energy. This was a form of energy management, where they used the night's coolness to maximize their efficiency and the herd's well-being. It was a race against the sun, a desperate push to make progress before the desert showed its true, unforgiving face. Midday was for resting, not traveling. As the sun reached its peak and the heat became unbearable, the cowboys would find a shady spot, often near a creek bed or a large rock formation, and let the herd rest. This wasn't a casual break. It was a non-negotiable part of the day, a strategic retreat from the heat that allowed both man and beast to recover. They would eat, tend to their horses, and, most importantly, rest themselves. The herd would be drifted into a comfortable, shady area where they could lie down and ruminate, conserving energy. The cowboys would find whatever sliver of shade they could, under a mesquite tree, against a rock, or simply under their hats, and wait for the worst of the heat to pass. It was a forced siesta, a power nap that kept them from overheating and collapsing from heat stroke. They understood that pushing through the hottest part of the day was not a sign of strength, but of foolishness that could get you and your herd killed. This rest period was a vital part of the survival strategy, a recognition that sometimes the best way to move forward is to stand still. The drive would resume in the late afternoon as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. They would travel until well after dark, guided by the moon and the stars, which were their only light sources. The cool of the evening brought a new energy to the drive. The cattle became more active, the dust settled, and the air filled with the quiet sounds of the trail. Traveling at night allowed them to take advantage of the cooler temperatures and provided an added benefit of keeping the herd calmer. The cowboys, who were constantly on a low-grade state of alert, could relax their guard slightly, knowing the cooler temperatures would keep the animals from panicking or stampeding. It was a shift in their entire rhythm, a decision to work with the natural cycles of the desert rather than fight against them. Their understanding of the relationship between temperature, animal behavior, and human endurance was a profound one. They had no thermometers, no weather forecasts, no modern tools to tell them when to stop or start. They had only their instincts and their knowledge of the land, a deep-seated wisdom that told them when it was safe to move and when it was better to wait. The nightly drives were a quiet, powerful testament to their resilience and ingenuity. They were not just moving cattle. They were navigating an environment that was actively trying to kill them, and they were doing it with an almost supernatural understanding of its rules. When a cowboy finally made camp, his battle with the heat was not over. The camp itself was a carefully chosen spot, often in the open to catch any breeze, but near enough to some natural feature for shade. The sleeping arrangements were a study in practical comfort and thermal engineering. Instead of a tent, they used a bedroll, which was a sleeping pad and blankets rolled up together. They would often sleep on the open ground, directly under the stars. This might seem like an odd choice, but it was a clever way to use the environment. The ground, which absorbed heat all day, would radiate warmth back to them during the cold desert night. But in the heat, they found ingenious ways to make it work for them. They would find a patch of sand that was slightly damp, or dig a shallow trench and cover it with a layer of canvas. This simple act of putting a small distance between their bodies and the hot ground could make all the difference. They also learned how to manage their body temperature while they slept. A bedroll made of wool or canvas was excellent at wicking away sweat and keeping them dry, which was crucial for staying cool. A dry body is a cool body. The cowboys would often wet a blanket and use it as a cover, letting the evaporative cooling effect of the water work its magic. It was like a prehistoric air conditioning system, simple but surprisingly effective. As the water evaporated from the blanket, it drew heat away from their bodies, providing a temporary but much-needed sense of relief. They might also soak their neckerchiefs or handkerchiefs and place them over their foreheads and necks, or even over their eyes, to help them fall asleep and stay cool throughout the night. It was a testament to their creativity and their ability to use the simplest of tools to solve the most complex of problems. Even the food and drink they consumed were part of their heat-beating strategy. They consumed simple, energy-rich meals like beans, bacon, and coffee. While hot coffee seems counterintuitive in the desert, it was a practical choice. A hot drink causes the body to sweat more, and as that sweat evaporates, it cools the skin. It was an ancient trick that turned the human body into its own cooling system. They also used their limited water supplies to make hot tea or coffee, which was a safer bet than drinking stagnant or questionable water without boiling it. They knew that a hot drink would not only warm them on the cold desert nights, but also help them regulate their body temperature during the heat of the day. They were a walking science experiment, using their own physiology to beat the heat proving that sometimes survival looks a lot like a hot cup of coffee. The entire camp was a system, from the placement of the fire to the way they slept and ate, all designed to fight back against the relentless heat. It was a delicate balance of rest, work, and ingenuity, and every day on the trail was a lesson in how to survive.